What's going on, Investomaniacs? Your boy Night Rider here. So I'm feeling a little bit better than I was in my last video, and I got out of that short position. So I was 100% of my portfolio was short the S&P 500. I was short maybe 5-6 trading days, and last week was the best week for the S&P 500 since the mid-1970s, and I was short. So I lost a lot of money. I maybe lost like 13%. I started with 337 and change, and I ended with 299 and change, so I lost like $38,000. I think if somebody would have sat me down and explained to me what I'm going to try to convey to you in this video, that I would have lost less money because I would have made a smaller sizing bet. So here is what I have somewhat learned. Some of this I kind of already knew, but it just, I don't know, it didn't really hit me. I wasn't really cognizant of it when I was making the trade. So the first thing is remember that shorts are more risky than longs. So what I was initially looking for was the equivalent amount of risk as being 100% long the S&P 500, but I was going short. So I just went short 100% the S&P 500. But you have to remember, short is riskier than going long. So because when you're long, if the position goes against you, it gets smaller, and you're never going to go bankrupt. Like if it's the S&P 500, unless like the United States just blows up, you're never going to go bankrupt. You're never going to hit a margin call. You're never going to be on margin. Everything's good. And you theoretically have like infinite upside with never going to zero, right? The opposite, when you're short, you have, you can go bankrupt, you can go bust, you can hit a margin call. If it goes against you at all, you're automatically on margin and you're paying margin fees. So then you actually need it to go in if you're just treading water, you're actually losing money because you're paying margin fees. And if it goes against you, your position gets larger, not smaller. So that means it's worse for down the line. So for all these reasons, being short is riskier. So therefore, if I was looking for the equivalent amount of risk of being 100% long the S&P 500, I probably should have been maybe like, I haven't ran this math, but just like round number, maybe like 66% long, and then having 34% in cash, and that would have maybe been about the same amount of risk as being 100% long. I mean, from a technical standpoint, it's never going to be, because even if it's 1%, you can always, whatever. I don't want to get into that. But the point is, that's like roughly maybe the same amount of risk that you're taking on. The second thing is that I failed to recognize, because this is, again, the first big market crash, big bear market and recession and blah, blah, blah that I've ever been through. So it's kind of acceptable that I'll make a couple mistakes. But I failed to remember that the market is way, way, way more volatile right now than it is typically. Typically, markets moving like 0.5% a day or something like that, 0.25%. If the market moves 1%, that's a big day usually. You're like, wow, the market's up over a whole percent? Whoa! Nowadays, in this crash, it's like, dude, if the market moves anything less than like 2%, you're like, oh, wow, this is almost like nothing's happening today, because usually there's so much going on. And I failed to appropriately take that into account. I was thinking in normal days, I would want the equivalent of 100% long exposure, but maybe I actually don't want that much exposure because we're seeing so much more volatility than we typically are. So I might actually be seeing the equivalent of maybe like 400, 500% in normal times. So like if this was normal times where we're typically seeing, let's see, say 0.5% move, and now we're seeing on an average 2.5% moves, that's like the equivalent of being 500% long or short. I hope you're kind of understanding the concept I'm trying to get across. It's the amount of variance that we're taking in, right? How much percentage can we expect to gain or lose? And I failed to appropriately take that into account right now in this kind of downswing that we're in. So I ended up losing a lot more money than I typically would in a more stable market. And then the third thing is more of a mental thing. So when I was and am, like most of you, long-term bullish on the market, but I was short-term bearish. Now, normally, when you go long the market or an individual stock that you long term believe is going up, you're bullish on, you can more easily take mentally a short term down drop. So if you buy it at 100 and it goes down to 80, you can kind of just go, oh, it's just variance. It'll come back. I'm going to write it out, right? But if you are going short and you're long-term bullish, but you're short-term bearish, as I was, where, for like a couple weeks or less, I'm thinking the market's going to go down, but it starts going against you, you need to actually have an exit strategy. You don't need to have an exit strategy when you're long and you're long-term bullish. You can just say, I'm just going to ride it out. It doesn't really matter if the stock goes up, down, sideways, whatever. Long-term, this is my view, and that's what I'm investing in. Whereas I'm thinking, okay, long-term, this is actually going to go against me. I think it's going to go up. But short-term, I think it's going to go in my direction, down. But it didn't go down. It went up. But I immediately am having to start asking myself, okay, when am I going to cut my losses? When am I going to cut my losses? When am I going to cut my losses? Because I'm seeing that it's going against me. And plus, my position was way too big. So that was going like way more than my comfort levels with the amount of money that I actually wanted to have risked. So that was compounding the issue. But I was having to ask, when am I going to get out of this? Because long term, I do think the stock is going the right way, the stock market, right? I'm bullish on it long term, but I was short. So I had, you kind of like, you have to cut your losses at some point, because the stock market may never come back to the point you short it at. So it's different than going long, where I'm not saying it's the right decision, but you could essentially, if the market goes against you, you can just wait it out, even if it's for years, until the market comes back. But you can't do that when you're short. The market may never come back. So you have to have more of an exit strategy for how much pain am I willing to take, when am I going to cut my losses, and have more of a time frame in place, and maybe don't change that time frame. Because I actually did originally have a time frame. When I actually entered the position, I was planning to only be in it for 2 days, and I would have only lost 1% had I stuck to that time frame, but I made a mistake, and I changed the reason for being in a trade whilst still in the trade, and then I ended up losing an extra 12%. So maybe also don't change the reason for why you're in the trade in the middle of a trade. Hope this has helped you guys, and maybe you guys won't lose $38,000 on your next trade. Have a good one.